Greetings and salutations, and welcome to this episode of Playwright Spotlight. Before we begin, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment down below, and share this video with your friends. If you're listening to us on your favorite podcast platform, be sure to leave a 5-star review and subscribe to the channel. My guest today has worked in theater, film, and television as a writer, director, and producer. In pursuit of his passion to see children succeed, he formed the Laughing Angels Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to helping children around the world by creating stories that celebrate the human spirit. He also serves on the board at the Cherry Lane Theater, a resident nonprofit theater founded by his wife, Angelina Fiordalsi. And I botched it again, and Matt, you can correct me on that later. Playwright credits include Fear, Actually We're Fucked, Bruce Lee is Dead, and I'm Not Feeling Too Good Either, Jason and the Nun, and Between Daylight and Boonville. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Matt Williams.
Thank you, James. Thank you.
Always a mouthful, I tell you.
That's right. Fiordalsi trips up everyone. That's my wife's last name. And you can't imagine how it gets butchered at the airport and in restaurants. So
oh, God.
That's okay.
I thought I had, my legal last name is Sauer, and I thought I had a hard enough time. I can't even imagine. And even when we said it, Fiordalsi.
Delisi.
There you go, everybody. You're going to get some.
You're going to get some.
Yes, exactly. You're going to get some Italian in here too.
Exactly.
So you started in film and television, correct?
No, I started in theater.
Oh, okay.
Everything I studied, my BFA was in acting, my MFA was in directing. I moved to New York to pursue a career in the theater. And I really wanted to direct. That was my primary focus. And so I couldn't afford royalties. I was a broke, ex-student. So I started writing one-act plays so I'd have something to direct. And the plays are what got me into TV, which then got me into film. So it all started in theater.
How much formal training in playwriting did you have when you started writing those one-acts?
None. I was trained as an actor and a director. And then obviously you learn basic dramaturgy, you learn how to break down a scene, you learn, intention, etc. But when I started writing, I wrote a full-length play, Between Daylight and Boonville, and it took me 3 years because I kept rewriting it because I didn't know what I was doing. And so I went and I read every single book I could find on dramaturgy. I mean, I read them all. Some of them are great, some of them are not so great. And I learned through trial and error by doing. And I've told this story before, but I had worked on it for about 2 years, and we had a reading at the Wonder Horse Theater, which was an off-Broadway theater in the East Village. And after the reading, the audience reacted, and it was a positive reaction. I stood up and I said, okay, I know what's working with the play. What is not working? It was like being machine gunned with criticism. I mean, wow. They splattered me against the wall. And I went, okay, this is okay, I've got a problem. And one man, a man named D.B. Gillis, who teaches playwriting, or used to teach playwriting, walked up to me and he said, you're missing a character. He said, I don't know who this character is or what this character does, but the play you're trying to write, you're missing a character. And so I said, to hell with it. I put the play back in a drawer. And then 2 or 3 weeks later, sitting at a coffee shop, this character walked in and started talking, and I just started writing down everything this character said. And sure enough, I plugged that character into the play. It came alive. We had a production. It got published. It played at the Kennedy Center. And that was the first one. So I said, I can't spend 3 more years learning how to write another play.
Sure.
So I started writing one-acts because I figure all the dramatic elements are in a one-act play. And through trial and error, I just kept honing my craft. And they tended to be funny. Bruce Lee is Dead, and I'm Not Feeling Too Good Either was actually a collection that included Jason and the Nun, MD 2020, Velveeta Shine, and a few others. And those were the one-acts that ended up in the hands of the Cosby producers, and I got called in to write The Cosby Show based on those one-act plays. So that's how that worked.
Wow. There's so much in here and I just don't know where to start. But the one thing that you said that really stands out to me, because you took an approach that I haven't heard yet, opposed to people who may not know how to playwright, they'll go and grab books on playwriting, which is not the approach you said you took. You said you went and took up books on dramaturgy.
I wanted to learn basic dramaturgy first. So you go back to George Pierce Baker and some of these writers, Leos Agri's book, The Art of Dramatic Writing. There was a book that I read that's out of print by a man named Kenneth Rowe. He wrote a book entitled Write That Play. Terrible title, but this man was Arthur Miller's drama teacher who taught Arthur Miller how to write in college. And I found an out-of-print copy of that book. And so I studied the book, and that book really, when I was a young playwright, taught me the importance of a major dramatic question. What is the driving question of the play? And you sit there for 2 or 3 hours to have that question answered. Okay, and that question must be planted early in the play, sometime around the inciting incident or shortly afterwards. So I started piecing together all this dramaturgy, and I went, okay, now I'll start reading some books about playwriting. But I wanted to learn the building blocks of telling a story.
So those two elements are separate, the inciting incident and the driving action of the story.
Yes. The inciting incident, things are normal, something happens, drop the pebble in the pond and start the ripples, right? Something changes. Today is the day something changes. Today is the day the people of the community come before Oedipus and go, we got a big problem. We need some help here, right? The driving action is, I will find the murderer, right? So he goes on his quest. Will Oedipus find the murderer that's causing this plague, correct? And it builds all the way up to the defining moment of the play. It's me. And he gouges his eyes out with his mom's brooches. It's that simple. The build is that simple. Now, along the way, there's complications and turns, but trained as a director and as an actor, every scene you ask, what does the character want? Why do they want it? How are they going about getting it? What opposes them? Is it the antagonist? Is it a condition? Is it the environment? Is it an interior struggle? So those basic questions have to be answered as you're writing your play, from scene to scene.
Is that driving force, is that just something that's one line? Because yes. I know that sometimes as playwrights or writers in it, we, that elevator line or that elevator pitch where it's that one line, this is what the story is about. And can we just say that as far as the driving force, it's just one line as well? You don't want to over... It
must be. It has to be simple. Uta Hagen used to say in her acting classes and in her book I forget the title of the book, but Respect for Acting, said to be simple is to be free. The simpler you can make your premise, your driving force, your controlling idea, the more drama you can hang on that. But that is what gives you your spine.
And that's not to say that there isn't more going on in the story. It's just your overall premise of this piece. This is what it is. I teach at Columbia. I teach playwrights and film students how to write television pilots. And the hardest concept to drill into their brain is to get simple, in that you can't believe your pilot or your TV show, your movie or your play or whatever. It can't be about, a bunch of friends who want to find love, but also they're working out their problems with their dad and they're trying to make a living. Well, that's a hodgepodge. Right. If it is, listen, every story is driven by a simple drive. Hamlet's father says, Hamlet, your uncle killed me, revenge me, right? The whole play is a deliberation. Am I doing the right thing? Oh my gosh, Claudius is praying. Do I kill him? I don't want him to go to heaven if I kill. The whole thing, and it is finally answered in that final big fight. And yes, he revenges his dad, right? So it's that simple. It's that simple. But to be simple takes a lot of work. How do you achieve simplicity? I mean, I can do it on the stage when I'm producing, but when it comes to writing, I'm not quite sure that I know how to do that.
I do it through elimination. Okay. I can tell you from personal experience on something I'm working on now, which I won't talk about in detail, but I've been working on this for a number of years, and it's a musical, and I'd never written a book for a musical. And it wasn't until we had our first private reading and I heard it read aloud, I went, wait, I've got the wrong premise. I've been hanging this whole musical on the wrong premise. And so it took me 3 days of sitting in my study and just scribbling on a yellow pad and go, is it this? And then finally I go, oh, I got it. And it boils down to 2 words. Love endures. Love endures. Okay. So now all I have to do is embody that love in a character and then set up enough challenges so that I prove that love can endure and pay it off. But it took me 3.5, 4 days of just on a yellow pad eliminating all the possibilities and finally getting it down to 2 words as my springboard into the play.
So 2 questions. I'm going to go with the one you just, something you just said a second ago, and that was that it has to embody the character. How do you do that? Through
action, not through words, not through description. Too many writers spend so much time on their description, and I usually screw with their brains in my class. Like I described little Mindy. She's got freckles and kind of red hair, and she's got a bicycle, a Schwinn bicycle with a basket on the front, and she rides all around the country roads, and she looks in the ditches for abandoned puppies and kittens. And then she takes them and she puts them in her basket and drives them back to her house. And she takes them down into her basement and she takes a clothesline and makes a hangsman noose, hangs them and burns out their eyes with cigarettes. Now that fries them out, right? I do that on purpose. All that description means nothing. You define your character by your actions, what they do. You can describe the freckles, you can describe the height, the weight, the culture, the race, whatever. It's what does the character do? Always introduce your characters through action. It's what they do, not what they say.
Real quick, and I apologize because my Wi-Fi just reset, and I lost you. So that's bizarre. So real quick, you said it burns them out and...
Oh, she takes the kittens into her basement, takes a clothesline, makes a hangman's noose, hangs the kitten by the neck and burns its eyes out with lit cigarettes. Now that shocks and upsets the students in my class, but I say, look, you got deceived by description. Description really means very little. Actions are what define a character. Characters are defined by what they do, not what they say. They may be defined by what other characters say about them, but what do the characters do? So when you introduce your characters, try and introduce them in action, doing what captures the essence of who they are. I know I had a student who introduced a character sitting in the dark on the couch. And somebody comes in and switches on the light and the character does, and I go, now, why did you do that? Well, she's waiting for her sister to arrive. And I said, so she's totally inactive. Is she depressed? Is she contemplating suicide? And I went through, no, she's just waiting for her sister to arrive. And I said, well, that's boring as hell. What is she doing before her sister arrives that tells me as an audience member, oh, this person's kind of intriguing?
What was the answer to that? What did it change to, if you can remember?
It changed to her unpacking boxes frantically. And automatically there's a story question. Why is she unpacking? What is she looking for? How long has she lived in this space? Who does she expect to? All of a sudden, these story questions, because every story is driven by questions, and every time you answer a question, you create a new question. So by just that activity alone, the audience is kind of leaning forward going, what is she doing? Why is she doing that? Who's showing up? How long she lived here? So that's what you need. So the audience is working. Don't do the audience's work for them.
I 100% agree with that. You mentioned that what you're currently working on, you've been working on for 2 years before you did you heard it out loud.
I've been researching and working on it for years, but I have a team of collaborators, and we finally got the music and we've got the book finished to the point where we could have a collection of writers read it aloud and I could hear it for the first time. And of course, at this ripe old age, when something's not working, it's like sirens going off. I mean, whoop, 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 this is wrong, this is wrong. And so I've got about 14 pages of notes, but I went back to basic dramaturgy. What ultimately is this story about? And I had the wrong premise.
So it wasn't that it took 2 years to be able to be in the position to go ahead and hear it.
Oh yeah.
So how much do you think that a table read or a stage reading is beneficial to playwriting?
Oh, I think it's absolutely crucial. And I don't want people to rehearse too much. I want actors to come in and read it cold, because then I can hear my mistakes. Good actors, if they have a rehearsal or two, can cover your bad transitions, can give intention and create objectives that aren't necessarily in the script. If a bunch of actors are reading your play cold, it's going to be pretty obvious where the cracks are, what's not working.
And the people that you invite, I mean, are there other people besides the actors that you're inviting to hear the feedback from? Or
yeah, I have a handful of. I do have an agent that I like, which is unusual, and respect, which is even more unusual. And she's brilliant, Beth Blickers. And I always invite Beth Blickers, my wife, Angelina Fiordalisi, with her years of mentoring playwrights. And then I have a couple of writers, less than a handful, 2 or 3 other writers, that I don't want too many voices. I just want 3, 4, 5 smart minds to just go, look at your second act. It flatlines, or your act break's not right, or just say, or just question, what did you intend? That's what helps me, or the question, what did you intend with this scene? And then I'll say, well, I explained that this is the moment that he discovered blah, blah, blah. And they'll go, well, I didn't get that. Okay, then that's not clear. I need to adjust that.
What constitutes bad feedback?
I can give you thousands of examples, but it's
things.
No, it's things like, I used to get network notes. I ran television shows for 35 years, and I would get notes like, your second act just needs more personality. Or I would have, honest to God, a network executive twirling his or her hair and go, I don't know, it feels like it needs legs. And so I would turn and go, okay, it needs legs. By that, do you mean the inciting incident is in the wrong place, or have we not created the major dramatic question early enough? Is the through line, the controlling idea for this episode, not clear? Or are we not building an ascending order to attention where there's a moment of crisis, climax, and resolution? What is that when you mean legs? And they'll twirl their hair and look at me and go, just fix it and leave. So, but I learned, always listen to everyone's notes. I don't care how inane or vapid they may be, listen to the notes, because one person may say that one thing that cracks open your second act or clarifies a moment. So I always listen, I'm always respectful, but that's bad notes. And the other bad note that you get, for playwrights anyway, is when someone comes up and tells you what you should do. I think in that scene, James, what you should do is have her slap him and then go and kick the cat. No, don't tell me what it should do. Ask me, what am I intending? And then challenge me to find a way to illustrate in dramatic action what I intend. It's always about finding the dramatic action that illustrates your intention.
Are there any other wonderful pieces of feedback that you think that should be taken into account besides those? I mean, those are wonderful ones. This is
one question I ask my graduate students when they're creating a pilot, a comedy pilot, TV pilot. And it's not my question. It actually comes from Walt Wongren, who was a dear friend, who was a prize-winning novelist. He happened to be a Lutheran minister as well. He wrote a gazillion books, won book awards. And he would always ask, what do you want your play to do? He wouldn't ask, what is it about? What do you want your play to do? And I even ask that when my students are writing a half-hour sitcom. I go, what do you want this series to do? And that usually stumps them. They can tell me what it's about, but they don't know what they want their story to do. So, and by that I mean, James, do you want your play to shine a light on a social injustice and bring it to awareness? Do you want to celebrate the love of family, familial love? Do you want to show the tragic consequences of excessive greed? Do you want to embody the ineffable love between a mother and her young child? What are you trying to do with your play? And it goes back to that one sentence that you talked about at the beginning of this interview. What do you want your play to do? And once you have that, then you can, then you start scraping away all that stuff that really doesn't hang on the spine of the play. Harold Clurman, brilliant director, wrote on directing the book. He always talks about the spine of the play, which is the same as the through line or the controlling idea. And on that spine is where you hang all the body parts. So you must have a spine in order to support all the body parts.
Do you think that playwrights should direct their own work?
No. I used to think they should, but I've seen too many examples of well-respected playwrights, and I've gone to productions in New York City that they've directed, and I go, no, they're not. A good director will shine a spotlight on the flaws and make you aware, and I think you get too precious with your words and moments, and you start protecting those moments rather than standing back and looking at the story as a whole and saying, is this story unfolding in a causal relationship from scene to scene and building properly? I think you need a director. Now, it's hard to find a good director. I've worked with brilliant directors, and I've had a director or two totally destroy my play, totally destroy it. And I wasn't angry enough, smart enough, or bold enough to just stop and shut down the production. I kept thinking we were going to turn a corner because it was just the wrong director. And every choice this director made was wrong.
When do you make that decision?
I think you better make it early on. I 3 times I went to the producers and I said, this isn't working. I think we should shut down the production. And 3 times they said, no, I think it's going to click. I think it's going to turn the corner. You know, hope springs eternal in theater. And then when we got into previews, it was a disaster. And the director decided, this person had already done all the technical elements, the sets, the lights, didn't attend previews to fine-tune the performances or address the script. And I'm going, well, isn't that why we spent 3.5 weeks rehearsing to get to this moment to do that? Isn't that why previews exist, is to fine-tune? So it was frustrating to the point where for about 2 years, I said, I'm never going to do theater again. I'm just done.
What else makes a bad director?
When they love to pontificate and hear themselves talk, as opposed to ask the right questions and try and understand what the actor needs. Somebody asked a famous film director, and I can't remember this person's name off the top of my head, how do you get the actors to do what you want? And this director said, no, my job isn't to get the actors to do what I want. My job is to get them to want to do what I need to tell the story. And you do that by asking questions. It's creating, every play, you have to create a new vocabulary with your cast. I may say to you, James, you know what? You need to be a little more ebullient here. Let's put some bubbles in this scene. And you'll go, I got it. I know what you mean. Or I might say, your intention's fuzzy here. You can't play 2 things at once. Let's talk about what you're really trying to do in this scene with Madam X over here, right? So it's getting down to the specific verb that the actor is playing. What is the actor trying to do? Not bad actors always act the how, right? A bad actor goes, this is how I'm going to say the line. I'm going to raise my hand above my head and fall to my knees, and that's how I'm going to say the line, right? A good actor always goes, why am I talking to James? What am I trying to get from James? In this scene, do I want James to kiss me, slap me, kick me out, or give me a raise? What am I trying to do in this scene? What do I need from James? You see what happens there. All of a sudden, that energy goes from being a light bulb in all directions, and it becomes laser-like. And that laser-like focus is what drives the scene. And then there's energy created between you and me in the scene. And it's that energy between us that sparkles on stage that draws people attention. And I emphasize to my students, people buy a theater ticket and sit in a seat to watch your characters think. They don't come to hear dialogue. They come to watch your characters think. And by think, that is make discoveries, deliberate, and make decisions. That's what your characters are doing. That's what drives your play. In my class, I call it the 3Ds: discovery, deliberation, decision. Those are the 3 pistons that drive every scene, every play to a climax.
Is all of that always in the writing?
It's got to be in the writing. I think really good actors, really good directors can maybe cover some bullshit and make you feel like that's happening. If it ain't on the page, it ain't on the stage.
Ain't that the truth?
And I try very consciously, and I even tell my students writing TV scripts, make your scripts director-proof. And by that I mean, write in behavior and direction into the lines that must be there, because to help clarify the intent or make a transition or whatever it is, I write business. Now, the first thing directors are taught, take your black magic marker and cross out all the stage directions, right? Cross out all the stage directions. Don't pay any attention to that. Well, that's bullshit, because my wife took a class with Jose Quintero, and he used this example. Jose Quintero, who brilliant director, right? And he was talking about directing Streetcar Named Desire. And in one scene, one of the neighbor ladies, I don't remember the character's name, while Blanche is talking, the scene's going, she's eating an apple. And it very specifically says, as she's watching this scene unfold, she's eating an apple. And Jose Quintero said, I don't get it. Why is this one character, who's not the focus of the scene, eating? And then he realized it was the crunch. It was punctuation to the scene. Every time she bit into the apple, Blanche flinched. So he found that texture by really examining the text, and he didn't arbitrarily put in bite into an apple. That was a conscious decision. I even tell my students, if you write, James gets a drink of water, in the middle of a scene, James pours himself a glass of water. I go, ask yourself, is he pouring that glass of water to gather his thoughts to come back with an answer? Is he doing that to avoid conflict? Is he doing that because he's contemplating splashing it in my face? Why is he pouring a glass of water at that specific moment? So the more you can put it on the page, the more you can prevent bad directing. And bad directing is basically a traffic cop. All they do is block. They don't help the actor find moment-to-moment intention and find the proper verbs to act.
In workshops that I've done or in mentoring, when I find those moments where it's like, oh, and so-and-so pours a drink right here, I always find that with most playwrights, it's to create business or physical action, but it has it serves no purpose. And I always say, well, okay, take this action out. What changes in the story? Most of the time it doesn't.
Right.
But after hearing what you just said, I don't know, am I giving bad feedback?
Well, I think if you have the luxury of having a playwright around, you can ask them, why are they doing that? But all movement must have a destination. Any movement on stage, physical, emotional, spiritual, must have a destination. And so sometimes you create business for a transition. You're changing the thought, you're changing the beat, right? Okay, we're going into another thought. And that business helps the actor make that transition. And it is always, the transition is where bad directing, bad acting, and bad writing shows up. It's always in the transition. If you're transitioning and it's not smooth and effortless, it calls attention to itself. I mean, you can watch bad actors when they go, well, James, I'm going to change, my intent now. And they announce that shift, that transition, and you go, okay, that's indicating it's bad acting. So I don't know. There's always a balance. And sometimes it's just having an understanding of orchestrating a scene and make sure that it's building properly.
Well, actually, let me go back, because I was going to ask this, but how do you write behavior in dialogue?
Well, you can write attitude in dialogue.
Okay.
So if I say, James, you believe that? I can go, oh, really, James, you believe that? James, you believe that? Honestly? Come on, James, you believe that? You see, just with a couple words, I can change my attitude and intention with the line. It's the same line, but you add a word or two, and it helps clarify the intention and the attitude and the energy of that line. Everything's about an exchange of energy on stage. I sometimes in rehearsals, I would have a tennis ball. And as I say my line, I toss it to you. I can lob it to you. I can fire it at your head. I can bounce it on the floor to you as I say that line. What's the energetic intention of that line as I'm talking to you right now? I can get real soft and can cajole you, or I can threaten you. That is the fun dynamics of playing with actors on stage. But I think a bad director just locks into one take of how the scene should be and imposes it on the actors, as opposed to organically, holistically finding the scene together.
Is that just re-rehearsing that scene over and over and seeing what else you can discover and taking different approaches?
I think it's playing opposites. What I do, whether directing or even in writing, if I go, oh, this is the scene where I tell James about his dog and he breaks down and cries, right? Well, let's play exactly the opposite. This is where I tell James about his dog and he starts laughing hysterically and rearranging his bookshelf. What happens if James lunges at me and grabs me by the neck? Play with the beautiful joy of what if. What if? And that doesn't mean it's going to be this forever, but by playing what if, it's like stretching the taffy in all these different directions. And you go, somewhere in there is the right tension, the right attitude, the right exchange. But don't just lock into something. We are not fax machines. Just keep repeating the same beats over and over. Let's keep stirring the pot and finding what the scene is really about.
Do you use parentheticals? Going back to, we talked about how do you write behavior and dialogue. So do you avoid parentheticals, or is like, this is going to need it just so I can get the intention?
No, I use parentheticals sparingly, and usually, and you avoid adverbs as much as you can. If you pick the right verb, you usually don't need an adverb, and you can keep your parentheticals to a minimum. And also don't shove stage directions into parentheticals. That's what beginning writers do. And don't direct on the page. That I was guilty of that because I was trained as a director, so I was directing on the page. And James, he picks up the cup and raises an eyebrow and cocks his head and asks, "Why do you ask that, Matt?" Well, that's bullshit. Don't do that.
Right.
Just, it's pretty obvious stuff.
You'd think so. You would think so. What? How detailed do you get in your stage directions?
I used to get very detailed, and now I want to leave it open to interpretation, because I would tend to design the set, hang the lights, direct the play on the page. I had a good friend, a dear friend, who's a screenwriter and a very good one, and he once sent me a script, and I'm reading along. It's a murder mystery set in New Orleans, and he spent half a page describing a hotel room with the peeling wallpaper and the dripping faucet and I said, "I'm sorry, is this a plot point? Are you planting seeds? Is this going to be called back as a story point?" He said, "No, I just wanted the reader to understand that it was a seedy hotel." And I said, "Then why don't you just write, he opens the door and a cockroach scurries across the moldy bedspread." What else do you need to say? You don't need to describe the wallpaper and the rust in the tub unless it's pertinent to the story, unless it's a story point, something you're going to build on.
Well, also, how much is the designer's job anyways?
I have learned to trust designers and allow them, because their imagination works differently than mine. I see the play before I hear it. I always see it because I have to have a context to move the characters around in. But I don't want what I see to be imposed on the play. I want the imagination of these trained designers to inform me. And then I can tell, oh, this doesn't feel right. No, this is too big a space. It needs to be more claustrophobic, whatever.
I had a college professor who talked about some of the plays. I don't know if it was Williams that we were reading at the time. And he's like, some of these plays are really meant to be read rather than watched. Not saying that they weren't, you know, supposed to be performed either, but some of the details, like kind of like what you were saying about describing the seedy hotel. And I think there was one piece of description in the beginning of the play, and the moonlight shone through the glass and shattered moonlight across the floor. And I'm not quite, oh my God, is that, how necessary is that? Or is that really for the
I think
purpose
you're talking
of reading
about, aren't you talking about Tom and Amanda and their apartment in St. Louis?
It very well may have been.
I think you are. And I think that's Tennessee loving those metaphors.
Sure. But how, like, from a, well, let's take it from a playwriting and a directing point of view.
Mm-hmm.
For the reader, that's great, you know, if you're reading it. But I mean, as a director,
as a director, as a designer,
you try to achieve that?
As a designer, I would go, okay, he's talking about fractured moonlight, cracked, fractured. That's a mood. So it's not glowing moonlight. It's not throbbing moonlight. It's fractured moonlight. That means there's a fractured world here. Something's not fitting. Something's breaking apart. Oh, this is the family's breaking apart. Tom's going to leave. Oh, okay. That's a starting point as a designer to start laying out a lighting plot. Okay. That's so what I guess I would say as a director. And I'd say somebody really smart, go make that work, because I don't know how to. Sure.
What do you find, are there any other habits that you find that you need to break with some of your beginning writers?
Yes. Explaining instead of evoking.
Is that the same as showing and not telling?
Yes.
Or telling and not showing?
Yeah. Don't describe that James is nervous, you know, or don't say James is really nervous as he waits for the boss to come into the conference room. Write in a piece of suggested action that shows that, whether it's chewing on a pencil, bouncing his knee, spinning an empty glass on the table. What is it? Is he checking his tie in the mirror repeatedly? Is he wiping perspiration off his forehead? Give me some indication of where he is emotionally, so when the boss walks in the room, I know, boom, there's something's going to happen.
So you said suggested action.
I would suggest these actions, and then a really smart actor may take that and bend it into something else. Okay. It's that famous story of on the waterfront, Marlon Brando and Rod Steiger in the back of the car. I don't know if you've heard that story before.
Oh, I don't think I've heard the story. I know the scene.
And Elia Kazan kept pushing, and it's written that when Rod Steiger pulls the gun on his brother, Marlon Brando, Brando goes, no, Charlie, no, you don't understand. And it was written, and they were working it, and Brando said, wait a minute. He pulls the gun, he points, and he goes, he's my brother. He's not going to shoot me. And in the movie, there's a brilliant moment. His brother sticks the gun on him, and he just takes his hand, and he moves it aside, and he goes, Charlie. They found that in rehearsal. That wasn't written that way. So that's what I mean by suggested action. And a good thinking actor will help, enhance or even find new business. But the springboard is what the writer puts, at least the indication that James is nervous waiting for his boss. James, the actor, may find other business that tells it even better than what I've suggested. And that's where you shouldn't be dogmatic as a playwright. Allow interpretation. My wife and I have this constant argument, not constant. We argue about many other things, not only this. She talks about actors creating a role. And I go, actors don't create a role. The writer creates the role. The actor interprets the role. Unless that writer is creating and writing the dialogue and creating the character in a one-person show where you have multiple, Whoopi Goldberg or whomever, create multiple characters and write the dialogue, they are creating characters. But the actor, Alec Baldwin playing Stanley Kowalski on Broadway, is not creating Stanley Kowalski. That was created by Tennessee Williams. It's been interpreted by Marlon Brando and name 1,000 other actors. But the writer creates the characters. Actors interpret that. That doesn't diminish the actor's gift, because A really good actor will bring dimensions to a role that you as a playwright never even imagined.
So, and just because I want to be specific, I want to make sure that we're not conflating the two. So when we're talking about, rather than saying James is nervous while he's waiting for the boss to enter for the meeting, opposed to suggesting, you're not saying, are you saying maybe he's chewing a pencil or maybe he's...
Yeah, I can suggest it and say, and that's what I would prefer to do. Maybe he's doing this, or write the business into the scene.
Okay.
So, for instance, let's just use this example that you just stumbled on. James is there chewing on this wooden pencil. The boss comes in, he sets it down, right? About a third of the way through the scene, the boss looks over, picks up the pencil and looks at all the chew marks on it, and looks at James. Now that piece of business has a pertinent story point. The boss just had an epiphany about James. What's he going to do with that pencil? Does he put it back down? Does he hand it back? Does he break it in half? I've written a piece of business that is furthering the story now because it's being utilized in the scene.
Which is not the same as directing on the page.
Exactly.
That's what I want to make sure that we're not conflating two different things. I don't want anybody listening.
To me, directing on the page, that's suggested. Directing on the page is telling James how to feel.
Right.
James mops his brow. He's worried. He's anxious. He doesn't know if he's going to get the job. Well, okay, now you're directing on the play. You're not only directing on the page, I mean, you are revealing the inner life of the character without behavior. You're telling me what's going on inside of James rather than James finding the business that's going to reveal his inner life. Is that making sense?
Yes. Yes,
okay, good.
Absolutely. Well, I just didn't want anybody listening to say, well, wait a second, they just told me not to do that. And I want to make sure that we are differentiating between the two because one has a purpose and the other one is, well, directing on the page. When you get your ideas, what's your next step? Or where do you find your inspiration and then where do you start? Or how do you start?
It usually starts with either a snippet of dialogue or an image I see, and then I start doodling on a yellow pad. And I can overhear, for instance, Jason and the Nun, which is one of the first one acts I wrote. I was directing a play off Broadway. This was years ago. And somebody walked into rehearsal and said, I just saw the damnedest thing. I was at Port Authority. And there was a nun there sitting on a stool with a basket full of coins. And this wino came over and tried to talk her out of a quarter. It was the funniest thing I've ever seen. And they just said that in passing. I didn't think anything about it. About 2 weeks later, Jason Rupert Carter III walks over and goes, hey, sweet thing. And he starts trying to get a quarter from her. And they end up matching coins. And so it can start with an incident like that. I was walking down, I don't know if I can cuss on your podcast.
Oh, absolutely. Please.
Okay. I was walking down Broadway. This was years ago. And as I'm walking down, this young couple in their 20s passed me. And he goes, don't be fucking with my nerves. You are fucking with my nerves. And I don't like it when you fuck with my nerves. And that's all I heard. And for the next 3 days, I went, wow, what did she do to fuck with his nerves to the point that they're ready to have a fight in the middle of the street? And so then I thought, what happened? Oh, she served him Velveeta cheese instead of real cheese. And that started, well, they're fighting over cheese, but that's not the real problem, right?
Sure. Right.
Okay. So it may start with a snippet of dialogue or an image. I saw Arthur Miller speak at a library in upstate New York about a year before he died. And he said he woke up one morning and in his imagination, he saw this older man sitting on a trunk. And he didn't know if it was an attic or a basement. This older man had a trench coat, an overcoat on, was sitting on a trunk. And he says, I had to write the play to figure out who that person was. And that play ended up being The Price. But that's how it started in his mind. He had one image and he had to keep asking questions to figure out who that person was, why were they there, what are they doing?
What Are there exercises along those lines that you give your students to come up with stories or premises?
There are some. Some of them are gimmicky, but there are some. For instance, I haven't done this, but I'm thinking about doing it if I do a seminar one day. Taking a bunch of names. I used the phrase out of the phone book, and they all laughed at me. They go, "Professor, there's no more phone books." Okay. I said, okay, just get a collection of names, put them on strips of paper, fold them up, put them in a hat, and have everyone in the class grab a name. And based on that name, they have to write 2 pages of dialogue, and something's got to change in the course based on whatever impression that name gives them of the character. So it's spontaneous writing. So if you're Felicity Merriweather or Jose Gonzalez or Albert Finnegan, Bob Jones, whatever it is you get, write a scene with that character and another character as much as one, or write a monologue. And that at least gets the juices going. I will also challenge them to, again, going back to introducing your character with action. I will ask them to write a half a page, and you cannot describe this character. You cannot tell me height or weight or color of hair or race or whatever. You cannot do that. Just through the actions in this first of 1 page, I should have a sense of who your character is by what they're doing and what they're saying.
So that's just a mixture of action and dialogue.
Action and dialogue. So I should have a really strong impression that, wow, Joe Jones, boy, he's a belligerent son of a bitch, or wow, he's tenderhearted, whatever it is, or, oh, he really loves animals, or he's got a problem with his girlfriend. Whatever it is, start to expose as quickly as possible the inner life of your character through actions and dialogue, not telling me in descriptions. I guess that's the theme of this.
No, it's great. Great. Theme's wonderful. How do you make your character sound different? How do you, Matt?
I love doing that. That's one of my joys, is really finding different voices. Having been trained as an actor, I get to improvise in different voices until it kind of lands, and then I can write in each character's voice. And I tell my students, if I take the black magic marker and mark out all the names, you should know which character is saying what, just based on word choice, sentence structure, the verbiage, right? So that to me is one of the joys of writing. And I admire someone like August Wilson. And when you watch his plays and listen to his plays, they can be jazz combos, they can be full orchestras. Every voice is different and they complement. And I remember a couple years ago seeing Jitney on Broadway. And I just sat back and marveled at the music of that dialogue, of that play. It was just magnificent. I mean, he really had an ear for dialogue.
Do you take that approach? Have you taken that approach where like your characters are each a different instrument?
I've never thought of them as instruments. I kind of do I used to do too much character analysis. I would spend days doing a 5-page analysis of James and a 5-day analysis of Matt and the background and what he had for breakfast and the day he was born. And I went, that's kind of wasted time. I would rather have a sense of what James wants and discover who James is as I'm writing. And it's an adage, no discovery for the writer, no discovery for the reader. Well, it's kind of the same thing. You want to discover, oh, I didn't know he was scared of snakes or superstitious or believed in goblins. I want to discover those things as I'm writing. But I don't consciously say, oh, this character's a piccolo, this is a bass drum. But I do think, how old is this character? Where did this character grow up? What is this character's educational level? What is this character's background? Because if this character dropped out of high school at 16 in the Bronx, or he graduated, from Indiana University from a a family of 12 kids, they're going to speak differently. They just are. So that starts to form. And then you start imagining how they walk, how they move. And all of a sudden, whether they're talking real fast or do they slow things down, and are they very contemplative? And then the orchestration starts happening naturally, but I don't consciously assign instruments to characters.
Sure. When you say talking real fast or slowing it down, is that in your dialogue, or is that in the character description? Or
I think it's implied in the dialogue. How you structure the words, how you break up the sentence, how you punctuate the sentence can tell. You can give indicators to the actor of how this goes, and you can give some hints, like Matt machines guns James with his argument or something. But I like not to fall on that. I like just the fact that the cadence is there and it's kind of a run-on sentence, and I'm so excited I have to talk faster because I want to make my point to you. Or wait a minute, and I may break up the sentence in a way where I'm really trying to read James, and what is he really saying here in this moment? So that kind of orchestration is just by punctuation, word choice, length of sentence, etc.
Are you applying those techniques as you write, or do you just get it all down on the page and then
get
go
it
back
all
through,
down? You don't,
and then go back through and to tweak how they sound or what they might. Okay.
I may even at some point go blah 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 blah, because I know that's going to be that kind of, and I'll come back in and actually write the dialogue if I'm on a roll. But if you stop and start polishing, you're going to lose the momentum, the through line, the narrative flow. Don't go back and keep rewriting the same friggin' scene over and over. Write the whole damn play, because the end of the play will tell you the beginning of the play. The beginning of the play is in the end of the play. So you look at the end and beginning and go, oh, wow. How did Oedipus go from being this Oedipus Rex at the beginning and this blind beggar stumbling out of the city? Well, here's our story. That's how he got there. So look at the beginning and end, and look at the arc and go, how did that happen? Well, there's a causal relationship that built to a climax, blah, blah, blah. All those dramaturgical terms again.
Do you have a routine, a writing routine?
I try very hard to have the same routine. I think it's important. You put your ass in the chair every day, and ideally at the same time, and write for the same time. My ideal routine is to wake up, have coffee. I may walk the dog or may not. And I have a moment of prayer, meditation time that usually spills over into creative time. And my ideal day is to write for 3 hours, uninterrupted. No phone, no interruptions whatsoever. After 3 hours, take a break, work out, go for lunch, take a nap, whatever I'm going to do. Come back for 2 hours in the afternoon and read over what I did. Not necessarily rewrite it, I'll make tweaks. But what that does is prime the mind for the next morning. So you go to bed with those story questions and characters in your head and wake up the next morning and you're ready to write, because your unconscious will work on it overnight. I even consciously ask my unconscious to work on things. Like, what happens in this scene? How do I get this character and this character there? And what happens? And I will ask my unconscious mind to work on it while I sleep. Almost like asking a little genie to go off and work on it. And then it's not always answered the next morning, but many times it is.
Do you keep a notebook or anything by your bed?
I used to, but I find I would wake up and scribble all this stuff at night and go, wow, this is the most brilliant thing I've ever written, and wake up and go, what is this? This is like chicken scrawls and spider webs. I don't know what the hell I was thinking.
Right,
so
right.
I trust it more after my first cup of coffee and in that quiet prayer time, because then what happens is somewhere way back here in the back of my mind, in the deep recesses of mine, things start bubbling up, and I don't even know what it is or what they're going to say, but I trust it and don't judge it and just start writing down everything that bubbles up. And a lot of times it leads into a scene or it leads into something. Now, you have to go. I tell my students, write from the heart, edit from the head. In other words, spill it out. I think Judd Apatow calls it the vomit draft. I've heard other writers call it the puke draft or the slop draft. Just get it out. And then once it's out, then you go in. And I've learned to appreciate rewriting, because that's when you go in and that's where your skill set, your craft comes in and go, nothing happens in this scene. This is a 3-page scene and nothing changes. Okay, can I cut that? And I use the Paddy Chayefsky rule. He said, if it enters your mind and you contemplate cutting something, cut it. If it even bubbles up and says, should I cut? Then cut it. You probably should. And 9 times out of 10, I think that's a good rule.
Once you finish that first draft, what's your next step?
Put it aside.
Distance. For how long?
It can be for a week or a month. But you have to have distance, because all those precious moments that you were so proud of when you discovered them while writing, you go back and go, that's contrived. Or I've manipulated the character to do that. The character wouldn't do that here. And so I think you need the distance. Don't show your work too early. I think I did that as a playwright when I first taught myself. As soon as I finished something, I'd give it to friends and go, look what I made, read it. And it would get torn apart, or I'd get too many opinions. Set it aside and just trust that inner voice that guides you to guide it, and keep working on it until you feel you're truly ready to get feedback from outside voices. Don't share it too quickly.
When do you know that you're done with a piece?
That's an interesting question, because I heard years ago a painter, someone said, every painter needs someone looking over their shoulder to tell them when to stop painting. And I kind of know, I don't know, there's almost like a click. And it's not that you're going to tweak in rehearsals, but there's a click and you go, oh, it's satisfying. It's just kind of, it's almost like being elbowed in the ribs by an angel. It's just a little punch and you go, okay, stop. It's intuitive. It feels right. I mean, and you can sit there and analyze and go, yeah. And I've got friends who are still rewriting the same play 8 years later, right? Trying to make it perfect. It's better to be done than perfect, right? Get it done. And I don't know. I think it's not really done until you have a production and you've got a director and good actors and designers. But to get into production, just trust your gut that you go, this feels complete. This feels like a satisfying meal. This feels like, okay, I've experienced something and I'm satisfied.
Are you rewriting during rehearsal process or no?
Yeah, sometimes, especially if actors find things that I didn't know were there. I remember my first play, Between Daylight and Boonville, Gary Beyer was the actor, and the character came in and had this impassioned speech about what he just saw, an accident, and this poor woman's husband was trapped in a truck in a coal mining accident. And he turned to me in rehearsal and he goes, why am I saying this? Again, a good actor acts the why, not the how. And I said, because you want her to know what happened. He said, why would I want her to know about the horrific death of her husband at this moment? Why would I tell her that? And as soon as he said that, I went, that is such a smart note. It wasn't forced out of him. He was volunteering the information. When challenged by the woman, I need to know what happened to my husband, and then he can't help but tell her what happened, as opposed to running in and reporting what happened. That's a mistake of young writers. They love characters to come in and report what happened, as opposed to forcing things to happen. Make your characters work. Make your characters work. But that was a smart actor in rehearsal, asked that question, and I did a complete rewrite of the scene based on that one question.
Any other things that amateur writers do that you think they should?
I think they get too precious. The worst thing they can do is tell actors how to do line readings. I even had this in television where the writers in the writer's room would be on the floor and they would be so upset. And they would say, but he should say it, and I want to go. Not, and I want to. I go, wait, stop. Either your joke works, your line works, or it doesn't. But you're not going to stand down there and tell these actors how to say a line. You don't ever do that. And it took a while to get it through a couple of the writers' heads.
So are you always at rehearsals?
No. Yeah, I believe in giving. Look, I didn't write plays for about 30 something years because I was doing so much TV. So I trust the directors and actors to go down and play with what's been written, put it on its feet. Then I come down and they present to me and the other writers what they done with the scene, then give them feedback. And then you're usually surprised in wow, they found things I didn't know was there, or they've missed the whole point. This is too argumentative. It's too acerbic. This is actually intended to be a teasing exchange.
Sure.
Sorry, that's my phone ringing in the background. Somebody's here.
That's okay.
So I like the actors and directors to get it on its feet and start moving around with it and interpreting the scene and then giving feedback, as opposed to sitting there as they're blocking and working out business.
Do you think that it's a playwriting podcast, but there, I'd like to think that there are other aspects of other writers out there that, whether they're film and television. Do you think that playwriting is a good starting point for writers that want to delve into television and film? Absolutely.
It's like ballet is the foundation for dance. Playwriting is the foundation for writing. Most of the writers I hired on staff in all those shows I created I always had 2 or 3 playwrights on staff because they understood basic dramaturgy. They knew how to tell a story. I tell my students, if you know how to beat out a story that works, that has a beginning, middle, and end, and is satisfying, and especially in half-hour TV, you will work forever in television. Because I've worked with writers that have been writing comedies for 25 years, and you put them in a story room, they can't beat out an episode. They can write a hell of a lot of jokes and create funny moments. But if you know the basic structure of a story and can beat it out and have a satisfying story, you will work in TV forever. And I find my playwrights in my class transition into television much easier than the filmmakers. Because television's still driven by dialogue. Even if it's a filmic 1-hour drama, it's still driven by dialogue. And playwrights learn to drive the story through dialogue.
Do you still work in television?
No, I'm done. I closed up shop. I'm writing prose. I just finished my first book. It's called Glimpses, a comedy writer's take on life, love, and all that spiritual stuff. And it's a bit of a memoir, and it's a collection of humorous essays and spiritual musings. And I've enjoyed it enormously because it's prose, it's humorous. I want people to laugh, and through the laughter, I want them to open their hearts. And then once their hearts are open, I want to think about, why am I laughing at this? And it really is a celebration of kindness and goodness. Glimpses mean finding little glimpses of God in the world. And by God, I'm not talking about the guy on the cloud, right?
Sure.
I'm talking about grace, moments of tenderness, unexpected compassion. And but it's humorous. First and foremost, it's humorous.
You mentioned early on in our conversation that playwriting is what launched you into your television career.
Yes.
And that was in New York?
Cosby Show.
Okay.
The executive producers, Tom Warner and Marcy Carsey, were desperate. Bill, I went in and interviewed right before the show premiered, 2 days before the show premiered. It hadn't been on the air yet. And I didn't know anything other than I knew I'd spent the last 3 years teaching myself how to write, teaching myself dramaturgy, right? How to make a story. And at the interview, Tom Warner said, "Do you think you can write for television?" I said, "I have no idea." He says, "Well, are you funny?" And I said, "Not necessarily." And he said, "Well, can you do this?" And I said, "Look, if the characters are funny, then the writing will be funny. I know how to tell a story." Anyway, the show premiered. They called me back. I had found out that Bill had fired almost everyone on staff, but 2 or 3 people, and I was hired for 6 weeks. I had the shortest contract imaginable, and I stayed there for 3 years, and then became a producer and co-created with John Marcus and Carmen Finestra, A Different World. And then from Cosby, left and created Roseanne. And then from Roseanne, I made the deal at Disney and created Carol and Company and some other shows and Home Improvement. And then continued to work, and from there expand into film. But it all started with one-act plays. Those one-act plays where I learned to hone my craft. That's what got me in the door and into television.
How? I'm curious.
They read it and they said, these are really funny and we like the characters. They responded to the characters. And they just understood there was a vibrancy to the writing. And that's not to tout my own horn. It is toot my own horn, tout my own horn, whatever kind of horn. But I tell my students at Columbia, at the end of the day, James and Matt and everyone else will have basically the same skill set, right? We will all have the same basic skill set. Why I'm going to hire James for a certain piece or show is because of the vibrancy of his essence. I want to feel who James is in his writing. Is he inherently funny? Is he whimsical? Is he? James Manos is one of my dear friends. He created Dexter. He writes this dark stuff. That's just, it's James Manos. He won an Emmy for The Sopranos, right? It comes from a different place. I couldn't write what James Manos writes. He couldn't write what I write because our essence is different. We both speak the same language, have the same skill set, but we're bringing different sensibilities, our soul, if you will, to it. And so when they read it, they went, oh, this guy understands how to find the funny. And that's, for whatever reason, I do. Even in real life, if I'm in the middle of an argument with my wife, I'll go, this would really be funny if. And that part of my brain that is always finding the funny, even on a subway ride or anywhere, I'm looking for the funny. I don't know why. I think God bonks you on the head when you're born and says, be funny.
But I mean, how do you translate that into writing? How do you get that vibrancy on the page?
By not being self-indulgent, by not overwriting, by finding the active through line of the scene and keeping it to the dramatic action and not hanging a bunch of verbiage on the spine of the play, but finding the action and constant change. I remember when I read some of those early playwriting books, they said, oh, a drama or any play is driven by constant change. And I went, okay, so I just created a bunch of French scenes and had different actors coming in and out. And I went, no, it means in the course of a 3-page scene with James, I'm going to go from laughing with James to discovering you stole what? All my money? You son of a bitch, I'm going to kill you by the end of the scene. That's constant change. There's an arc to that. And that goes back to discovery, deliberation, decision. The characters are always learning or discovering something and then deciding what to do next. That's what drives a play.
Deliberation, expand on that.
Well, I come home from, I'm a traveling salesman, and I come home and I surprise my wife. And when I get home, I walk up and open the door and you're in bed with my wife. Okay? Now, I can make a split second deliberation. I throw the door open, pick up the ashtray, and kill you with it. All right? I can close the door, go back down to my car, and spend the night driving the city, deliberating what I'm going to do. And I go back to the house. Hi, honey, I'm home. Oh, hi, honey, I've missed you so much. Good. Hey, how are you doing? I'm fine. Has James been over? No, not at all. Okay, I was just wondering. You see, that deliberation was stretched over hours as opposed to a split second. But the discovery was, James is in bed with my wife. The deliberation is, what am I going to do? It can be visceral and immediate. It can be deliberate. And maybe the rest of if this is a movie, let's say, or a play, how am I going to torture her and get back at James? And then I start making decisions how to put that into action. It sounds like James Manos is writing this instead of Matt Williams does.
So at that point, I mean, well, how do you, or is it, I don't know if it's how do you, or is it important to, obviously you have to let the audience know what your character knows, but not let other characters know.
That goes back to who's your point of view character as the audience. Which character am I seeing the world, and am I processing the world through James's eyes or Matt's eyes? Who's your protagonist? And your protagonist and your point of view character don't necessarily have to be the same character.
We could say that that's like Gatsby, right?
Yes, exactly. That's a perfect example. Your point of view character, oftentimes it is the protagonist, but who is your point of view character? How are you seeing the world through this character's eyes? Because this character is telling you by what they do how you feel, and just because you're living in that character's skin. In the scenario I just pitched, Matt is the point of view character, and the audience is processing through Matt's point of view, right? So, and I'm letting them in on Matt's thought process, not on James's thought process.
And so a point of view character is always necessary, though it doesn't have to be the protagonist.
It doesn't have to be first person subjective point of view necessarily, that you go from room to room with that person and that's all you see. But even in a big play or a long movie or a musical, there is a character who defines kind of the worldview, the point of view of the play. If it's about Huckleberry Finn, you're processing the world through Huckleberry Finn's eyes, right? If you're, and I guess this would be debatable in Streetcar Named Desire, I think it's through Stanley Kowalski's eyes. Others may argue it's through Blanche's, but I don't think so.
Well, go ahead.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say we can say the same thing about Glass Menagerie. We're seeing it through Tom's eyes.
Yes.
Does Tom become the protagonist, or would we say Laura's the protagonist in this regard? Because I think we know
Laura's the protagonist. She's got the stakes. She's the one driving everything. Tom is the point of view character. He's observing this, and it's set up brilliantly in the way Williams, wrote it. You see him standing outside the scene, and he walks into the scene. He's the point of view character, and we're seeing the world of Amanda through Tom's eyes. But she's definitely the protagonist. She's the one. She must get that daughter married to the gentleman. She must save her family by doing this, right? She's the one with the stakes and the drive.
Do you think that, does that make more brilliant writing by having a separate POV? Not
necessarily. I think it's just a matter of how you want to tell your story. It's also how much, is it Brechtian? Is it alien effect? You want to push the audience back and have them not emotionally engage so much and observe and think as they're watching? Do you want to pull them in emotionally into the play? I think it was Arthur Hopkins, who's an old theater critic, said, I want the thought that arises from the emotion, not the emotion that rises from the thought. And the whole argument was have an emotional reaction and become emotionally engaged. And then when the play's over, you think about it for days, as opposed to Brecht and others. Let's push back. I want you to observe this and think about this social issue as you watch this play.
You mentioned earlier brilliant directing. I think we got the sense of good directing, and we definitely got the sense of bad directing. What makes a brilliant director?
Precision, but a moment to moment, finding every moment, every thought in the scene. And a good director will look at a scene and go, what is the defining moment of this scene? Whether it's 1 page or 8 pages, it's going to build up to this moment and build away from there. And then it's going to move into the next scene. And it's also helping the actors find the right thought process. I remember I saw, it's years ago, a documentary, and I think it was Bergman. Bergman was directing, and I can't remember the actress. Anyway, in the scene, they showed him talking to this actress, and she's listening to her daughter. I'm sorry, I can't remember the details, but this character is watching her daughter play the piano. And Bergman went over and said, what are you thinking? And the actress says, well, I'm thinking how lovely and beautiful my daughter is. He says, no, you're thinking she will never be perfect. She's not that good of a pianist. Nothing changed. Camera angles, action, the actor's thought process changed, and it changed the whole scene. And George Stevens, who directed Giant and a bunch of great movies, right? George Stevens used to tell his actors, film actors, I'm talking about film actors now, he said, speak softly, think loud. Speak softly, think loud. And that goes back to The audience is there to watch your characters think. Thoughts create energy. A good screen actor is creating energy that fills the screen and the theater only because they're thinking the right thoughts moment to moment to moment. And a good director, a brilliant director, will help the actor find those connective thoughts that drives them through the scene without dictating to the actor.
Right.
And telling the actor what to think, but guiding the actor, right? And that's the tricky balance.
I think we'd be remiss if we didn't touch on a soap opera you worked on.
Oh God!
And I only have to because I feel a duty to Paul Sirachi for in a way making this happen, because he brought you up in his episode. So I'm like, I need to track down Matt Williams to get him on. Can we talk about that soap opera and what were you doing?
I was knocking around. I was trying to support myself any way I could, and the irony is, I was supporting myself as an actor, in order to write and direct. And so I would do commercials, I would do voiceovers. I did that, and then I got cast on Another Life, which was the Christian Broadcast Network soap opera. And for 3 years, I played Dr. Ben Martin on the soap opera down in Virginia Beach. And it's a little ironic, I don't know what you call it, that a Christian soap opera, all this sin and death and deception is in a Christian soap opera, but I was the good guy doctor. Here's the thing that was brilliant about that. I was an actor, but I knew I really wanted to write and direct. And Linwood Boomer, God rest his soul, was the executive producer. And he noticed that I was always watching the cameras, because it was multicam, 3 cameras, right? Yeah. He said, between scenes, you want to come to the booth and watch the director cut the scenes? I said, yeah, oh, absolutely. I got paid as an actor to learn how to cut and watch and direct 3 cameras. And then he said, if you're really interested, you want to come into the editing bay? I said, absolutely. I spent 3 years on that soap opera. I'm not a good actor. I was okay. I kind of looked the part, is why I got it. But I got 3 years of training in multi-camera television. 1 week to the day after the soap opera shut down, I got called into the Cosby Show. And the first question they asked, have you ever had any experience with multicam television? I said, well, as a matter of fact, I've just spent the last 3 years, and I knew all about it. So it was just a natural transition. And also, doing multicam sitcoms is like writing a 1-act play. They just happen to have an audience behind the cameras. There's cameras between the audience and the actors, but it's a 22-minute 1-act. That's funny.
Did you find that working on that soap opera helped your playwriting at all?
Oh, absolutely. It got to the point that the writing was pretty bad because it was written by students. And I would come in, and I had been deep in my dramaturgical studies and had been writing all my 1-acts. And I would get a scene, and at the very beginning, I'll give you an example of directing on the page. This is God's truth. This is a scene that I did. It said, Dr. Ben paces nervously. He looks anxiously at the phone. He picks it up. He puts it down. The phone rings. He answers. He goes, first line of dialogue, Lori, I'm so nervous. I thought, okay. And what I learned is the young writers would write the end of the scene at the beginning. There was no arc to the scene. So I started rewriting my scenes as an actor, and the director would read them and goes, oh, that is better. So I was pretty bold, I guess. I would go and rewrite my scenes, and then they would come in. The director would say, do you have changes? I'd say, yes. They would Xerox those pages. It's that long ago, it was Xerox. And then we would rehearse with those pages because I knew how to structure a scene. So yes, it honed my skills, and I learned to write fast in TV. I'm not a fast writer, but you learn to write fast in television because Friday you're taping come hell or high water, so you've got to get your rewrites done quickly. You can't be precious.
When should a scene end, and when should a scene begin, and when should a scene end?
Well, there's the adage, and I think it was, I can't, if it's Robert McKee or if it was a playwright who said, cut into the scene as late as possible. And that's usually true, but in comedy, you may have a free beat of comedy that's just a fun beat to start the mood of the scene. And then after a half page of a really good joke or some funny behavior, you start your scene. So it's not as true for half-hour television as it is for drama. And as soon as the story question of that scene is answered, you're done. Get out. So will Jill discover the birthday cake under the sink? Oh, she doesn't discover it. Get out of the scene. Okay, create the next story question. Where did the birthday cake get hidden? I'm just making up funny situation, but answer the story question of the scene.
And that applies to playwriting as well.
I think so. Although you have more time on the stage, the tyranny of film is what happens next, and then what happens, and then what happens. Television is like that, but it kind of straddles plays and film. It asks the question, what happens next? But you have a little more time where in the play you can stop and James can do the half-page monologue about his parakeet before he pulls the gun on the guy. You have some leeway on stage that you don't have in film. I'm being very facetious, of course, when I say that, but there's a degree of truth there.
Sure. Sure. Can we talk about what you're working on now? You mentioned it briefly.
Not really. It's still in a nascent stage. The most important thing is this book, because we're going to publishers with it. I've spent 2 years writing it. The response has been very good. We have to secure a deal and get it out into the world. And Glimpses is something I'm very proud of. And before we started this interview, as I mentioned, all the profits from this book, any lectures I give, any seminars, every penny is going to go to charities that help children around the world. That's my passion. I've been blessed. I've been rewarded greatly with television and film. So this is my way of giving back. I hope this book is my Newman zone. I don't make salad dressing, but I know how to tell stories.
Sure.
So I hope by telling these stories and getting them out in the world, I can make a shitload of money so I can give it all away to these charities.
That's wonderful. Now, are these they're just the stories? They're not necessarily plays or that include plays or just?
No, it's all stories. It's all prose. It's all prose. It's personal essays, humorous essays, and spiritual musings. They each are self-contained. I very consciously wrote bite-sized chapters so that you can enjoy it, put the book down, pick it up and read 3 or 4 chapters, or put it down, read 1 chapter. I imagine, if you're running through airport and Hudson Books and you see the guy that created Roseanne and Home Improvement and a collection of funny essays, you may want to grab it for your flight. And I want it to be thoughtful, but I really want it to be fun.
And it's out now.
Not yet. We're still, the agent is negotiating the publishing house waters. I'm mixing metaphors here or something. She's negotiating. She's swimming in the publishing house waters. She's paddling. I don't know. Anyway, we're messing around with publishers.
As long as she's not drowning in it, then that's
as long as we're not drowning, it'll be okay.
Wonderful. Well, congratulations on that. That's got to be a huge achievement. I'm sure that it's heartwarming as well.
It feels good.
Good. And then can we touch on Cherry Lane Theater real quick as well before?
Yeah. My wife has run the Cherry Lane Theater for 26 years. She's been the artistic director, the owner and the artistic director, and she has championed and run the Mentor Series, which won an Obie Award. That's where established playwrights from Edward Albee, Sam Shepard, Wendy Wasserstein, go across the board, Charles Fuller, Ed Bullins, would nurture and guide young playwrights for a year. And the young playwrights play would get a workshop production at the Cherry Lane. And she's done that for 26 years, and she's kept this nonprofit afloat, and she's in the process of selling it. It's like she's done her duty. She's served the theater community so well. And now that we're both in our late 60s, early 70s, we go, okay, let's just kick back and do some other things that we really enjoy. And so she is in the process of selling the theater, and that should happen within the next month. And
that's is the Cherry Lane Theater, is that in New York?
It is in New York, in the West Village, in Greenwich Village. It's the oldest running off-Broadway theater in America. It's been running, in fact, This year, it's 100 years as a theater.
Wow.
It's turning 100 years old.
Good for that.
Yeah.
So will it still continue its purpose?
Yes, that was part of the deal. It must remain a theater. It must remain the Cherry Lane Theater. It will continue to have productions, and the legacy will continue.
And is there a process on how to get involved if there were young playwrights that wanted to, submit their work?
I don't know now. It used to be through the Mentor series, and then there would be some Playwriting series. I don't know with the new artistic director what the process is going to be, okay. But any playwright should be sending their plays everywhere anyway, to every theater, and get them out there in the world. And I think as soon as this is settled and the transition is complete, it will be another theater where playwrights should, submit their work.
Any advice on submitting to do different?
No play before it's time. Don't rush it. Don't hurry up and get it out there. Make sure you get feedback. Make sure you polish the play. I tell my students, make sure this reflects who you are and it reflects your best writing. You get, as cliched as it sounds, you get one chance to make a first impression. And my first impression of James isn't going to be in an interview or sitting across the desk from him. It's going to be when I open up that script, I look at the title and flip open and read that first page. I'm going to have an impression of who this James Eldon is. Who's James Eldon? What is he doing? What is he saying? What is he like? Where's his essence on the page? That's my first impression. So make sure you have poured yourself into your script, and make sure the script has no typos, is formatted properly. We had a rule at Windancer when I was all those years of running TV. If a creative executive was reading a script and they got to the third typo, they threw it in the trash, because it meant the writer didn't care enough to really proof their script. They didn't go through with a fine-tooth comb.
Fair enough. Where can people find your work?
Mainly on reruns, mainly on Hulu and Disney Channel and Cozy TV and late night TV. Just go to reruns, and that's where you'll listen. I've been out of the TV game for a little while, and I'm loving writing prose, and so I'm enjoying this last third of my life.
How about your stage work? Where can people find that? Is there anywhere they can find your plays?
There's a few plays at Samuel French, and I've got a few floating around on those playwriting sites. But if they dig around, they might find one.
Wonderful,
James.
Matt, thank you. No, my pleasure. Thank you for taking the time to come up. I'm glad that we got this figured out, because I know that I was going back and forth with Matthew. We're trying to make this moment happen. So I'm so glad that we finally got to do this.
I am too.
Wonderful.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for coming on the Playwright Spotlight.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for tuning into this episode of Playwright Spotlight. Again, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment down below, and share this video with a friend. If you're listening to us on your favorite podcast platform, be sure to leave us a 5-star review and subscribe to the channel. And in the meantime, and until we see each other again, keep writing.